Congratulations, admitted students. My name is Josh Sandquist, and I'm an associate professor in biology. This is my ninth year at Grinnell. I teach classes at all levels of our curriculum, including our introductory biology course, our 200 level cell and molecular course, and at the 300 level, I teach two courses. One course called Advanced Cell Biology and another called Principles of Pharmacology. In my research, I use frog embryos to study basic mechanisms governing how cells divide. Lately, my research has been focused on understanding orientation of cell division. What I mean by that is, if you imagine that a cell is a three-dimensional object existing in three-dimensional space, the orientation in which the cell divides will determine where in three-dimensional space the resulting daughter cells will exist. And this has consequences for the proper development of an organism, also has consequences in diseases like cancer. So that's what I study in my lab. Speaking of my research, I do have to say that is really one of my favorite things about teaching at Grinnell. Our approach to teaching is very research forward. And what I mean by that is that we don't erect artificial barriers between research and class. We don't feel that the goal of studying biology is to memorize a bunch of facts and then research is just applying those facts to problems. Rather, we feel that doing research, investigating biological phenomena, is the best way to learn what biology is all about. I love sitting side by side with a student, examining something on the microscope. It just makes me feel like more of a craftsperson working closely with an apprentice rather than a talking textbook. And that is actually a pretty good setup for the lecture you're about to hear. This lecture excerpt comes from my intro biology course, which we call Bio 150, Introduction to Biological Inquiry. In short, the goal of our Bio 150 course in general is to introduce students to the methods of biological investigation and let them do actual research, rather than the more typical broad survey of biological knowledge you'd find at most other schools. We offer many different sections of Bio 150, and each has a different biology of focus depending on the professor's expertise. In my Bio 150, we examine how embryos develop using that frog model system that I just told you about. In this specific lecture, I am providing some background knowledge on an event called cortical rotation, which is important for the developing embryo to determine which side will be its front and which will be its back. I hope you enjoy. Hello everyone, Professor Sandquist here. In this video lecture, I'm going to give you a little background on cortical rotation, which will help you prepare for the Scharf and Gerhardt paper you're going to read for Monday. So the outline for this lecture: background on cortical rotation, background on microtubules, which are a part of cortical rotation, as you will see, and then very brief a little bit about the primary scientific literature, because you already read a piece on how to read the scientific literature. So again, placing this into context of the entire course, the overarching theme of the course is we're thinking about how organisms, vertebrates in particular, frogs very particularly, how they develop from an egg, which is relatively simple, to an adult frog that is relatively complex, and this works out reliably. It works out pretty much the exact same way every time. The adult frog form is pretty much the same. So how does that happen? And we're going to spend most of our time thinking about events kind of in this early embryonic development stage. In particular, we want to know, how do body axes form so reliably? So thinking about ourselves, we're just sort of, like I said, fancy tubes with little appendages hanging off of us. We have a mouth and we have an anus. That's the anterior, posterior, or head to tail axis. And then we have stuff hanging off of that tube. So that's one major axis, the anterior, posterior. The other one is the dorsal ventral axis, dorsal being back and ventral being the belly. So this works out reliably every time. How does that happen? What are the cues that specify the formation of those axes? Well, there are two main things that affect axis development in vertebrates. One is the animal vegetal hemispheres, which are inherent to the embryo. We'll talk about those in a second. And the second thing is the sperm entry point. So where the sperm actually comes into the egg is important for setting off a chain of events that helps define axes. So here's a image, a drawing of a egg. We have here, you can see there's kind of two, so it's a sphere and there are two main hemispheres. That's the main division. You have the animal hemisphere, which is the top half, shown gray here, and the vegetal hemisphere, which is the bottom half, shown yellow here. So if you think of this about a sphere, kind of like the Earth, there's also a pole at the North Pole and South Pole. The animal pole would be at the very top of the animal hemisphere, and so on for the vegetal pole. So, thinking about the anterior-posterior axes, the anterior end ends up somewhere in this animal hemisphere. It's not the exact same as the animal pole, but it's somewhere in the animal hemisphere. So that's one thing that's sort of inherent to the egg, this animal-vegetal axis, and that relates generally to the anterior-posterior axis. Now the dorsal-ventral axis, that is defined largely by the sperm entry point. So the sperm always enters somewhere in the animal hemisphere. So we have our sperm over here, and it's going to bind somewhere up here. And when it does, it triggers an event that establishes this dorsal ventral axis. So let's unpack that a little bit more. So what happens is the pigmented, or this animal cortex, I'll tell you what cortex means in a minute, rotates towards the sperm wherever it came in. So this is what that looks like, this outer cortex. Again, I'll tell you a little bit more about the cortex in a minute, but there's an event, this part of this egg rotates towards the side where the sperm entered, and then the opposite side becomes the dorsal side. So this area, which we call the gray crescent, forms over here opposite of where the sperm came in, and this will be the dorsal side, so then the ventral side is opposite that. So we have the dorsal ventral axis running this way, and then the anterior posterior axis running roughly 90 degrees to that. So let's think about this cortical rotation a bit more. I said the word cortex a bunch. Maybe you're not sure what that means, so let's think about that. So on the left here, imagine this is our egg that we just looked at. You're looking at it from the side, on the outside. So you have this brown pigmented top half, the animal hemisphere, and the yellowish, whitish vegetal hemisphere. Now if we cut away, just sort of cut that in half and expose what's in the middle, you would see something that looks a little bit more like this. So there are more parts to this egg, and I always think this kind of reminds me of what the Earth. Remember, you have the mantle and the crust can move on the outside of the mantle. Well, it's the same idea with the egg. So some parts to this you have in the animal cortex is this sort of rigid, thin piece that wraps around the outside of the egg, and it's attached to, but loosely attached, separate from, it can move independently from this core that's on the inside. So you have an animal cortex, so that would just be this outer cortex that's on the animal side, and it contains brown pigment. And then you have the cytoplasmic core on the inside, and then there's also vegetal cortex and vegetal core. Underneath the brown pigment, you have a separate pigment, a gray pigment, which is more attached or a part of the core. So this gray pigment can move separately from this brown pigment. And you'll see why that's significant in a second here. So here is our egg. So let's say sperm comes in and enters the egg right here where this arrow points. So I'm drawing this red dashed line just for reference, and what will happen is, remember I said the cortex rotates toward the sperm entry point. So you would see something like this. Notice how that cytoplasmic core stayed in the orientation that it was in, but this outer cortex rotates. Let's watch that again. So this outer cortex, while attached to the core, is loosely attached, and the two can rotate separately from each other. And what we expose here now is this area. So this gray crescent, before, this gray pigment was all covered by brown pigment, so you couldn't see it. But after the rotation, the gray pigment underneath can be seen through this cortex, and that's what this gray crescent is. And so again, the gray crescent side forms the dorsal side, and the opposite side, on the side of the sperm entry, becomes the ventral side. Now this is what would happen. This is what rotation would look like if the egg was just sort of freely floating in a pond. This cytoplasmic core is heavy, relatively heavy or dense compared to the cortex, so it stays in line with gravity. So the bottom here is much heavier than the upper part. So then the cortex rotates relative to that. So again, this is what it would look like pre-rotation. Now in the lab, we can fix the outside, the cortex, such that it gets stuck in place by embedding it in some agar or something like that that holds it. If you add sperm and it rotates, what you'll see is if that outer part is held rigid, the rotation will still occur. So this central core will now be turned relative to the cortex. So the point of this is that there must be some large force inherent inside the egg that's able to push this heavy cytoplasmic core out of the plane of gravity. So normally this stays with gravity and the cortex rotates, but if you fix the cortex, there's enough force that you can turn this heavy core outside the plane of gravity. So that'll be important in a little bit. So let's just real quick what this looks like, just to show you it's not made up. Here's a little movie showing you how that pigment is rotating and kind of contracting. And what you see here is this area that looks like a crescent that's a little bit lighter than the pigmented but darker than the bottom half. So that's the gray crescent. It's more obvious in other frogs. In Xenopus, normally you can't really see the gray crescent. Maybe you can see an area where there's a little bit of pigment contracted, but the gray crescent itself isn't super obvious. But other frogs, like leopard frogs or other things, salamanders, things, you can see the gray crescent much more obviously. So this gray crescent event occurs, but what's really the consequence of it, this cortical rotation? So if we look at the egg before rotation, while the egg is relatively simple, there still is some structure to it. The cytoplasm isn't homogeneous throughout. You have the cytoplasm that's towards the top, the animal pole, is less dense. It's kind of general cytoplasm. Below that you have some more a denser layer of cytoplasm, or heavier things like mitochondria and lighter yolk platelets. So these are just little membrane-bound sacs of yolk. Yolk is just generic protein that will be used as sort of raw materials for the egg to grow and turn into an embryo. So you have these yolk platelets that are of a lighter size, and then there's heavier yolk platelets which are more dense. So you have this density gradient of material inside the egg. RNA also that's floating around in the cytoplasm is also distributed asymmetrically throughout the egg. There's some different RNAs at the top, the animal pole, than from at the vegetal pole. But that's not so important for us to think about right now. So what happens in cortical rotation, this image has it rotating the opposite way I was just showing you, but the cortex will rotate this way, and what you'll see is the cortex that was here, that was attached to this heavier, denser stuff, pulls up a little bit of that vegetal heavy yolk platelet of cytoplasm. So before, where you had all this blue on top of the yellow, over here you have some blue beside yellow. So what that does is that serves as a signal. It's a new sort of structure that has been produced inside the egg because of this cortical rotation, and that starts a chain of events that we'll learn more about during the semester that causes this side to become dorsal and the opposite side to become ventral. Kind of cool. It's kind of amazing that something physical like that, just the movement of these platelets, can cause something as amazing as deciding which side of the frog will be its belly and which side will be its back. Kind of wild. Okay, so we'll learn more about that as the semester goes on. Another sort of wild thing I think about cortical rotation is that it happens so early in frog development. So these are on the top here. We have some images of Xenopus that I took. These are looking down on them, so you see the brown half here, so you're looking right down on the animal pole and the animal hemisphere. These are hand drawings, so the classic hand drawings, not mine, someone else's, of the same stage, but looking at it from the side. So you have the pigment. And so we have the egg, it's one cell, then it divides in half, you get two cells, then four, then eight, and so on. Well, cortical rotation occurs in here it takes about 90 minutes, depending on temperature, for the egg after fertilization to form this first division. And cortical rotation happens about 2/3 of the way through that. So that event that occurs, the sperm binds, that's maybe the first thing, but the sperm enters, and then this cortical rotation occurs in just like 60 minutes. And that sets up a chain of events that's going to cause the frog to develop in the appropriate way. So how do we know this? How do we determine experimentally that the gray crescent is so important for development of these axes? Well, here's an experiment. This is just a cartoon representation of an experiment that was performed over 100 years ago now. So here we have our egg. One is we're showing it from the dorsal side from the front, so here's that gray crescent we've been talking about. And if you just turn this 90 degrees, now the gray crescent's on the side. This is just for demonstration purposes. It doesn't really have any meaning for the experiment yet. But imagine that this is going to be our control egg that we're just going to let go on its own. And this is going to be the experimental egg that something was done to it. So what was done to it? So in the control egg, this is pretty much always the case that first division cuts in half this gray crescent. Okay, so each half or each new hemisphere of this egg, each cell, this is 1 and 2 cells, will get some of that gray crescent. That's what normally happens. Now the question basically was, what happens if we change that and force the cell to divide such that the gray crescent is all in one of the cells? So to do that, kind of cleverly, the experimenters took a little thread, wrapped it around the egg to pinch it a little bit before it would divide, and that sort of we're not going to go into this, but that physically caused the egg to divide usually in the same plane as that string. So this forced the division to go here, leaving all the gray crescent in this future cell and none of the gray crescent in this future cell. So after the first division happened, what they could do is they could sort of cut this embryo in half and to make two different cells. And at this early stage in development, these cells are totipotent, which means that when you cut it into half, you can actually get two full frogs. This is how identical twins are formed naturally in the early stages. Well, there's 2 or 4, maybe up to 8 cells. Early on in embryo development, each cell could become a whole organism. So after it made a division, either this way or this way, they then tore them in half and then let them become full organisms. And what they saw was, in this case, each cell became a fully formed tadpole. So now we have identical twin tadpoles. Now the surprising event was that when the experimental condition where all the gray crescent was on one side, the cell that got the gray crescent became a normal tadpole, but the one that didn't have any gray crescent was essentially just the belly, just that ventral piece. So over time, what we sort of discover, the way we come to think about this, is that naturally the default sort of developmental state for these tissues is to form the ventral side, and you need that special area in the gray crescent where that cytoplasm was mixed, we talked about a minute ago. You need that special area to tell where the dorsal side is going to be. When you have that gray crescent, that establishes dorsal, and then ventral can kind of occur opposite that. So in the absence of gray crescent, you get all belly. I'll stop this sample lecture here. If you want to learn about how the egg generates the force to drive cortical rotation, you'll have to come take my class. At any rate, I hope this lecture helps you understand a bit better what the Grinnell educational experience is like. Congratulations again on being admitted to Grinnell, and good luck with your decision.